Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know, now in our 18th year, I interview writers and sometimes other brands of artists about their exploits in the world of art, what inspired them, what they're working on, what their future might hold for them. We have a wide net. We cast a wide net, so if you have ideas for writers or other artists who might be on the show, watch for our address at the end of the program. I want to remind you too that many past episodes of the Writer's Block are available to take out at the Sawyer Library, our wonderful library here in Gloucester. You can go in, take a past episode out as you would a book, watch it at home, and then bring it back as you would a book. I'm very happy to say tonight we have a little variety. We have a guest tonight who is an artist and a photographer rather than primarily a writer, although he does write some, I know. His name is Leslie Bartlett, and I am going to read the biographical information on Les from a brochure that appeared during the presently still running show of his work at the Cape Ann Historical Museum. Leslie D. Bartlett has lived on Cape Ann for 38 years and has spent the last decade exploring its unique blend of artistic and historic opportunities for photographic interpretation. This exhibition, referring to the exhibit that's still running at the Cape Ann Historical, is the culmination of 8 years of climbing out on quarry ledges at sunrise and sunset to capture the unique light and geography of the region's granite quarries. Chapters on a Quarry Wall, the name of the presentation, the show, with more than 40 vertical images of quarry stone on exhibit, portrays the seasons of the year, especially winter, and the effect of salt water and ocean mist on granite. Now that sounds exciting to me, and I want to welcome Les Bartlett here to tell us about this exciting show.
Thank you very much, John.
And your other work.
Yes. Well,
tell me about the inception of this show at the Cape Ann Historical.
The show at the Cape Ann Historical Museum came a result of my doing what I normally do, which is to begin pre-dawn over Cathedral Ave in Pigeon Cove. And I enjoy that spot because it's a great spot from May through October to watch the sunrise, and I'll go there before dawn. And I was there one summer morning and I saw this very serious painter intensely painting. And I took a picture and went running up to him and said, "May I show you my work?" And he liked the work very much and ultimately went to Harold Bell and Judith McCulloch at the Cape Ann Historic in 2004 and said that it might be good for them to see my work. And I was just coming off a show at the New England School of Art and Design at that moment and had quite a bit of good press, and walked in to find the press on the table and them very interested in booking the show. So I've known about this exhibit that's running at the Cape Ann Historic for over 3 years. And that's propelled me to be out on the quarry ledges more, and also to
little pressure there.
Well, yeah, and also to get feedback from people in terms of how they responded to the work as it unfolded, and it's definitely an unfolding process. I can't say that I began going into the quarries with the intent of having a show or accumulating anything in that way. I stumbled in. I stumbled in when we were having some great droughts in 2001 and 2002, where there was much greater depth in the quarries. And the walls really attracted me. These were walls that never had seen sunlight.
So you were shooting the quarries already?
Yes.
When you conceived the show in 2004.
Yeah, what happened was that I'd been shooting mostly horizontal work, and I'd done a vertical and taken it into another artist in Rockport. And I watched the hair stand up on his arms when he looked at it. And he looked at me and he said, "This is going to be your signature, these kind of vertical shots." And that really propelled me out to do things like climbing up 40 feet of scree and hanging off 10 inches of cliff, with a lot of planning ahead of time to ensure my safety, okay, throughout the whole process.
Good. You're here.
Yeah, I'm here. And in the process, I discovered that I really preferred winter a lot. I liked fall. I liked rainy conditions. I liked circumstances where there was a lot of mist in the air. It really brought out a great vibrancy to the colors. And with the addition of the salt air and mist, it just was luminescent and iridescent.
So if it's sunny and warm, you just stay in bed, huh?
Pretty much so. I've been known to go out then as well. But winter cannot be beat on Cape Ann. It's the real test of our love of Cape Ann light because it's so short.
So you've been shooting the quarries now, and you mentioned your vertical work.
Yes.
And we see behind us some
Right.
of the
A little bit of
vertical
that.
portraits that hang in the show.
Yes.
Tell me conceptually and technically, what's the difference between a vertical shot and a horizontal shot? Is it simply the same shot cropped differently?
This
or
is a great question.
Conceived
It's
differently?
conceived totally differently. When I began this process of photography, which has only been for 10 years, when I began 10 years ago, I used a tripod and a special type of mount that would allow you to very mechanically take the picture and move it, and then stitch it together on the computer to get what we now know as panoramic, which everyone does and everyone can do. After a couple of years, I threw the tripod away. I got really bored with the restrictions. I realized that if I wanted to go in and do vertical formats, that I couldn't use a tripod for that. Also, from my previous career of being a juggler with Legrand, David, and Beverly for some 30 years, I developed a great wide lateral vision. And I found that I would come into a situation and I would see the ends and then come into the middle. I was not seeing it from a center focus framed circumstance.
So when you say vertical format, do you mean first and primarily how you conceive of the shot?
Yeah,
And what's going to wind up on the silk or on the paper?
Yeah, and I'm seeing it from foot to straight overhead in some circumstances. And even there, even now when we're looking at each other, we're seeing more in the top and more in the bottom. But we're only paying attention to here. But there's a great amount of emotional content and subject matter in the higher above and the lower below. So by just discarding the tripod, I was able to get great vertical formats. These images that are on the wall, that are in the museum, are 24 inches by 90 inches in length.
How did discarding the tripod relate directly to getting vertical format photographs?
It means that I'm working handheld. So for instance, if I were doing a vertical portrait of you, I would be going 1, 2, 3, 4 in this way, and then assembling the pieces.
But you still assemble?
Still assemble.
So are the pictures behind us?
The pictures behind us are all assembled, yes. There are 3 or 4 camera shots or camera frames to each one of these.
And they are completely seamless now as we
Absolutely.
see them.
And again, they're presented 24 by 90. So the entire back wall at the museum, and it's titled Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, Spring. To give a full cycle with the idea that there's repetition, but with great variation too. In it.
So you conceive vertically. And did you know when you started to think vertically that would be, as your colleague said, your signature piece?
Yeah, because very early on then I sort of said, well, what am I going to call these things? And I like the literary reference of chapters, the idea that there's some sort of a book interpretation here, or a flow of chapters, that there's a progression or a story that's being told through the stone, although there's not a literal connection between them. I'm sort of looking to see what the weather brings in that sense to connect them.
So the show will actually close in 2008, and you began thinking of the show in 2004. So
that is correct.
What did you do during that period to get the materials for the show? And more as a background, what did you have to do as an artist businessman on the side to make sure that the show went fluidly?
You mean at the Cape Ann Historical?
Yeah.
Yeah. They gave me a lot of latitude. They saw only the first 10 pieces, and now there are over 40 pieces. And these were pieces that have accumulated along the way, that I've either showed to them or showed to people in small versions, and now have assembled in their full size. And even the horizontals, several of the horizontals are 40 by 60.
You have some horizontals?
I do as well,
stuck
yes.
in there?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That's from the latitude they gave you, I suppose.
That is correct, yeah. I even got them to paint the back wall for me, which works very well with these images, to have a slight gray tone to it.
How old are the oldest images, and how recent are the
The oldest are from 2002, and the most recent is from September of 2007. Was when I finally said to myself, I can't keep going out and taking more photographs. I have to keep my nose to the grindstone here to get these out. But one of the other things that accumulated too is that I'm a member of the Rockport Art Association Photographers Group. And last year I gave 2 lectures at the Rockport Art Association that were very well received. And it was really the opportunity to go back and look first at historically how the panorama developed in Europe in the 17th century and its influence on even the Hudson River School painters and American painters. Again, in terms of the sort of wide horizons and the treatment of the horizons. The verticals are mine, but they covered the horizontals as well. And then to see how, particularly with the verticals, that there was a great influence on me coming from the Chinese and Japanese classical and master landscape painters and calligraphers back through the early AD centuries.
Because of the verticality.
Because of the verticality. And a real, my work is not about people in the foreground. It's not about objects in the foreground. The foreground is often out of focus. My work is about the far horizon and the far, far horizon, which is very much more Chinese related. In the process of putting my catalog together, and I'd like to read to you just if I could.
Please.
I came, after doing the writing and honing it.
Let me just
sure.
hold the catalog up.
There you go.
Les has just referred to the catalog, and here's the catalog cover, beautifully done, for the show that is running at Cape Ann Historical.
This is a catalog that I produced myself because I felt it was really important to have a narrative text to go along with the images.
I like the union of words.
Yeah, just as there are
words and art.
These tremendous striations that we know in granite, and the tremendous pressures and the forces, the words kind of thread their way through the images.
Good, I like that image.
The one that I end with, and I came across I think 2 weeks ago, is a quote from Q Hsi, who in the 11th century wrote what's considered to be a classic essay on landscape painting. So here's a paragraph from him called Aged Masters. Some water flows, some stones are flat like slates. Some water forms cascades, some stones are curiously shaped. A waterfall jumps from the face of the forest. Strangely shaped stones crouch by the roadside like tigers. There is rain about to rain. There is snow about to snow. There is heavy rain. There is heavy snow. There is the clearing of the rain. There is the clearing of the snow.
Very nice. That's a poem.
That's a selection from his essay on how to paint
prose.
Landscape. It's prose, actually, but very lyrical in its impact.
It is indeed.
And
the repetitions.
It relates very much to me because by the time I got to the second lecture at the Rockport Art Association, I was speaking more from the viewpoint of art. And my work is very painterly in the way that it's presented, in the way that it's received.
Painterly?
Painterly. It's much about the way that the color either creates the form or reacts to the form. There's a great geological structure. This is granite that's been formed millions of years ago, long before we were here and presumably long after we've left.
Indeed.
And the mere scratch that we are on this surface called Cape Ann and the way that we busy with ourselves doesn't begin to really reveal the story of the tremendous pressures and the way that the stones react to weather. I actually, within the past year, have seen stone fall in at Halibut Point and went online and wrote a little thing called When All the Quarries of Cape Ann Fill In, because they will at a certain point. It's just gravity wins out.
At the quarry, just inland there, a few hundred yards.
That's correct.
Was this a small piece?
It was, it was nowhere near the edge where people walk, but it was certainly visible and people kind of knew the area. It was a good 20, 30-foot section, maybe about 4 feet thick, that just simply fell off.
So a crack, it allowed water, and then it freezes and melts, freezes and melts.
Yep.
And
yep.
So good crowbar ice.
A good crowbar ice, and it's from the viewpoint of art and being an artist. It's sort of I firmly believe that we all begin from our own backyard, and that the backyard is our culture, our family, everything, the stuff that we come with, and that at a certain point, if there is a calling to be an artist, that one goes down and digs under the backyard. And at a certain point, there's no longer a backyard, it's common ground. And then this very curious thing happens. And you can call it fate, you can call it a daimon, there are lots of philosophical ways of looking at it. But you come back up from the common ground, back up into the backyard with a form. And that form can be writing, can be poetry, it can be fiction or nonfiction, it can be a graphic artist, it can be a photographer, it can be a painter. But one then comes up and really then starts to look around the backyard and say, well, there's this shed over here that I haven't been in for a long time. What's in it? What can I make use of? And that everyone does as a good artist. I do think that that happens, whether one can articulate it or not. But I think beyond that, then one has to realize, oh, look, there are other people with other backyards. And so part of the process with this show is my giving back and realizing a tremendous obligation to the heritage of Cape Ann. Even though I was not born here, I've only lived here for 40 years.
Only.
But I have this passion about the area that I get treated as if I've been here for generations. So I'm talking with people that are referring back to events that my family wasn't there and I wasn't there, but there's a sharing in that. So part of the process with this show, I've been doing a lot of, school groups have come in since the show opened last October. I've been doing a lot of outreach to the community. There have been a number of other talks given. There was one given in December in Rockport at the Rockport Art Association. Right about
December of 06.
Of 07. 07. The show opened, yeah.
Oh, okay.
07, yeah. And I'm very excited in that within in 2 weeks from when this show comes on, I'll be doing a shadow puppet play at the Cape Ann Historical on the history of quarrying on Cape Ann. And this has me tremendously excited. It's building on my work. It's building a lot on the history and the historic photo collections of both the Cape Ann Historical and the Sandy Bay Historical Society in Rockport. And it's a different angle. There have been a lot of things presented about the heritage of fishing, not that much about the heritage of rock.
That's true.
And part of the message with what my body of work represents is that it's not about just taking what's immediately accessible. Sometimes you got to dig. Sometimes you got to be, you got to go at it time and time again. When I first began photographing seriously for this installation, for the first year in Rockport, and most of the work is from either Flat Ledge underneath the Keystone Bridge in Rockport or from Halibut Point. I only walked a distance of 80 feet back and forth for a year because these were rocks that did not get direct sunlight. And I wanted to learn the light day and night through the year.
This rock never gets sunlight.
Never gets direct sunlight. It's always indirect. And so for me, the time where the rocks became like moving the tongue around in one's mouth and like making sounds and learning a language from mother and father, and then the sounds becoming words and the words becoming sentences.
That's a wonderful image, and I can see how it works with from the beginning in the idea of the backyard and finding your own backyard. Made me think of Wizard of Oz. And, why is photography and visual art your backyard? What shaped you to bend towards that form instead of words, for instance, which you clearly love and respect and work with, or some other art form?
You know, I have two stories to this. The first story is that, well, my father says that when I was in high school, I wanted a camera but never got one. That's what I've been saying for the past 10 years in this course of becoming a photographer. I only last fall at the opening found out. He was telling my wife that, yes, Leslie wanted a camera when he was in high school, but we couldn't afford it. Now, when I heard that, made me realize that this is, I really believe in the daimon and fate, that one is fated to fulfill something. And it may take a very long time, but ultimately if one holds to that intent, it emerges. It comes up into the backyard. It's like the stone pushing up, as we've got plenty of around here. So the fact again is I've only been a photographer for 10 years. It's as much about the connection to the passion and the wish to react to light. And so much of the work for me reflects the knowledge of Cape Ann light and what it's about, but also just the way that internal light and the light that we carry within our hearts, within our spirits, gets manifest. Right? And I have a one-liner for that I wrote.
Please.
Okay. The line is, the deeper you go in a quarry, the more galleries you uncover, and the less refined you become. Now, I wrote this, I think, a couple of months ago and thought it was going to be in the invitation, and then it became too much to put in the invitation when we had the show opening. But there's a lot in this. There's obviously a pun of quarry, with the physical stone and a quarry in terms of an object of pursuit or hunting or an intent in it. It was only last summer that I found out the significance of the word galleries. In doing research on who are the people that photograph quarries or paint quarries, I came across this painter named Peter Prendergast in Wales. And Peter Prendergast painted slate quarries, which are unlike the granite quarries of Cape Ann where they're extracting blocks. The slate quarries are spiral.
He painted them.
Yes, he lived on the edge of them and painted them. He painted them. But in the process of reading his book called The Painter's Quarry, I came across that the scaffolding that they used in order to go through multiple layers of the quarry at the same time is called a gallery. And that just jumped out at me because we were used to the gallery as an exhibition of art. Here, gallery is being used as a staging platform for extracting or cutting or removing.
I think gallery is sometimes in some dialects used also as a house porch.
As a house porch, interesting. That I didn't know.
I believe, yeah.
And of course, then the last part and the less refined you become because you're getting down deeper. I mean, part of the fascination for me has been the artistry in quarrying came with, how did they know where to begin? I mean, they're just looking at the ground and they have to start somewhere. And in fact, in quarrying language, starting a stone was when the first rock was cut out to do something with. So there's this intent for something to happen, as there is for any artist, whether it's shaping a poem or a sculpture or a painting or composing a photograph, where you begin and you don't really know where you're going to go. There's no guarantee at all in the process. And so this whole process of quarrying, where everything's been blown away, these are the results that are left with just very thin tracings left from the quarrymen, you know, the drill marks. Mm-hmm. And in the whole scheme of things, they don't add up to a whole lot when faced with, with the geological forces and the ages that are left. Cézanne at Mount Saint Victoire, and we painted the Bibimis quarry, which was where he grew up, said his famous quote that I like, I cannot attain the intensity that is unfolded before my senses. I mean, I've been to these quarry walls close enough to smell them, to taste them almost, and have been amazed at the quality of the light and the colors.
I wonder if we evolved, because we've evolved somewhat over the last 30, 40, 50, 60,000 years to have some kind of almost genetic proclivity for stone, because it was our first tool and our first art form in cavemen times. And people would search out flints and certain stones that were good for sparking mm-hmm. and creating fire. So stone was part of our foundation.
That spark, as I started to prepare, I kept reading, and I found a tremendous affinity with the Mexican poet Octavio Paz.
You quote
I do.
him
I've got him quoted in a couple of things. I have a simple quote from him where he says, "What is not stone is light." And that just hit me right between the crosshairs.
That's Octavio Paz.
Yes. Yeah. And I then found a second poem, and I translated by Mark Strand. And if you know the old poem, rock, scissors, paper, scissors cut paper, paper covers rock, rock crushes scissors. Well, Paz wrote this poem called Wind, Water, Stone. And I got permission, it's translated by Mark Strand, and I got permission from New Directions, the publisher, to use it, read it. So I'm going to read it now. It's a nice one.
Please.
Wind and water and stone. The water hollowed the stone. The wind dispersed the water. The stone stopped the wind. Water and wind and stone. The wind sculpted the stone. The stone is a cup of water. The water runs off and is wind. Stone and wind and water. The wind sings in its turnings. The water murmurs as it goes. The motionless stone is quiet. Wind and water and stone. One is the other and is neither. Among their empty names they pass and disappear. Water and stone and wind.
Very nice. Paz, translated by Mark Strand.
It's translated by Mark Strand. And actually, if people can make it over before the end of the month, they'll see that this poem is printed out as part of a triptych of wind and water and stone in winter and in summer, and it's on a piece that's 92 inches in length with a poem on it that's emblazoned into it.
I'm going to remember that poem and the earlier line for a long time. What's not stone is light.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I don't want to forget this, what kind of camera do you use?
I use a, I began with a point and shoot, as they're called, a humble camera 10 years ago. Now I use a very big 11 megapixel Canon camera and use big Epson printers. So I have the top of the technology available to me.
How much does that camera cost?
4 years ago it was $8,000 for the camera body. I think the camera value now is around $4,000 on it. You know, the pace of technology keeps going. That's part of the parallel here is that just as the digital technology keeps going, in the quarry world, every time you turned a corner, there was a new derrick, there was a new way of cutting stone, a better way of pumping out water. The impact for me is that at that time, when all the quarries were working, Cape Ann rang from the sound of stone being pushed, drilled, dynamited. Dust was everywhere. It was a reverberation across the Cape that simply closed in the 1930s when it was cheaper to do it by rail car and overland transportation, and that was it. And at that moment, the key factor appeared. The water started to come back into the quarries.
And it had to be previously continually pumped.
Absolutely.
To keep it
and there were very
work.
few, the Cape Ann Historical Museum was very kind to put me in the context of painters who'd gone in to paint the quarries. There are very few that ventured in while they were being worked because it was work. The quarrymen didn't turn aside so that Lester Stevens could sit there with his paintbrush and do a nice scene of flat ledge. He had to work under extreme conditions. So and it's a similar sort of thing for me in terms of the sort of conditions with the vegetation and the foliage and the time of the year as to what's available to me in it.
I understand now if you want to get granite cobbles, you have to import them because
Yes.
it's too expensive
to
buy or produce or buy them
I was
here.
at the dedication this past May in 2007 of the sculpture garden at the Cape Ann Historical. And they mentioned that in order to finish it off, they had to get stone off Cape. That there is no way to continue to build, other than small pieces around with stone on Cape Ann. And that's a tragedy, a big tragedy.
I just got the 2-minute signal from Andrew Love, our director.
Okay.
And I want to ask you very, very quickly,
Sure.
Is there something else you'd like to read?
I do. I have one more thing to read.
30 seconds.
All right, 30 seconds is, this is a very brief poem that I wrote on the passing of Harold Bell. And it's called When the Quarries of Cape Ann Wept and Groaned.
Please.
At first hammer strike, start of rock, then wild granite forced to pavers. Final hammer strike, then open pit quit. Death of a Cape Anner, then open prayer quiet.
Thank you very
John.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And that was the dedication you mentioned earlier was for
The sculpture
dedication
garden,
of the
yes.
sculpture garden to Harold Bell.
And I would add that my installation at the Cape Ann Historical is dedicated to his memory.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
I've got to begin to wrap up, so I want to thank you very much, Leslie Bartlett, for being with us and talking about stone and light. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody in television land as well for being with us. If you've learned something about the visual art of photography from Les Bartlett tonight and also about the show that I know you're going to see at Cape Ann Historical, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.